Good morning and welcome to the Green Heat in Greenspaces conference. And thanks very much to Lynn for running us through those housekeeping arrangements. And a huge thank you to the Improvement Service for hosting the conference this morning. I'm Julie Proctor, Chief Exec of Greenspace Scotland, and I will be your chair for the first session. For those of you who aren't familiar with Greenspace Scotland, we're Scotland's parks approaches to managing and resourcing green spaces. We came to work on renewable energy via a programme looking at climate resilient parks and green spaces and the contribution that they can make to climate mitigation and adaptation and to achieving Scotland's ambitious net zero targets. It's just over a year ago now, in February 2020, that we gathered in Stirling for the first Park Power Conference. And then we were able to share the finding that Scotland's parks had the potential to supply low carbon heat to at least 15% of Scotland's households. The Green Heat and Green Space project extends that work, looking beyond parks and playing fields to a wider range of green and blue spaces. And so today we will be giving you some advanced preview of some headline findings ahead of their publication next month when we are out of the pre-election period. So this is the programme for this morning. If Lynn can just pop that one up. And you will see that we have broken the morning down into 3 chunks with a short break in between to give you a chance to have a stretch, to grab a cuppa or nip to the loo. So in the first session, we're going to hear about the findings from the GIGS project and how that project has been developed. After a short break, we will move on to our second session where we'll have 2 presentations looking at strategic energy planning. And then the last session of the morning will move us from strategy to implementation with a focus on developing heat projects. We've got a short time for questions at the end of each session, so do remember to type any questions you may have in the questions tool. And as Lynn was mentioning, if you want to comment on anything, share any links or information, then please do use the chat function. So I'm going to hand over now to John Maslin, Greenspace Scotland's Park Power Project Manager, and to Ruth Bush, Senior Consultant in Low Carbon Policy and Planning at Ramble. And they're going to give us an overview of the GIGS project and an advanced preview of some of those key findings. So John, over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us from me and also from my fellow presenter this morning, Ruth Bush from Ramble. We're going to do a double act today. Ruth is the filling in the sandwich, and I'm going to kick things off and talk about where GIGS has come from, and then I'm going to come back in and talk about the national findings. So if we go to the next slide, please. Right, so I wanted to introduce the conference this morning by talking a bit about why this subject is important and where it's coming from. So if you see the graphic on the right-hand side, this is a league table, if you like, of how all the European countries are doing in terms of their provision of low-carbon heat. Now, unfortunately, we are down in the relegation zone, in fact, at the bottom of this graph, albeit it was 2017, but we probably haven't moved from that position. With the Netherlands, similarly, a very centralized natural gas-based energy heat network country just above us. And indeed, the UK, on average, also above Scotland. So this is the scope. This is what the ministerial forward in the recent heat in building strategy that came out about a month or so ago describes as immensely challenging. But we must make very significant progress. It talks about towards eliminating our emissions from the way we heat our buildings over the next decade. So a real push for a transition towards low carbon heat. And as one of my fellow delegates and presenters today, Dave Pearson, always points out, not just talking about greenhouse gas emissions, but also talking about air quality. And the recent death of a 9-year-old girl in London with a coroner ruling of air pollution as the main cause really brings this home. So it's definitely air pollution is particularly localized air pollution is a key driver as well. And the other driver behind our study is around the importance of strategic development and trying to avoid this piecemeal, what they call a piecemeal reactive approach to opportunities, because this is unlikely to realize the wider strategic benefits. So what we want to contribute, or what we've wanted to contribute to this agenda is to help the strategic development of understanding our energy climate in Scotland. Okay, next slide, please. Heat is not, or certainly low carbon heat is not like electricity. We can't stick heat plants in the middle of remote areas and then transport heat across long distances in the way that we do with electricity. It doesn't work that way. We can't get the sorts of economic viability of projects by doing this sort of thing. We have to put heat plants near the points of high demand for heat, which is near our towns and cities effectively, or indeed in our towns and cities. Next slide, please. And of course, our low carbon technologies for heat generation are often a lot more space hungry than our fossil fuel counterparts. So this is Caird Park in Dundee. Although this looks like a cycling track, this is in fact a borehole array for about 70 vertical boreholes. So it's a multi-purpose site, but it's using considerable space. So we've got this dual problem of needing essentially space near points of high demand and significant amounts of area to meet the demand. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of principle as to where green heat and green spaces came from. Originally, I should have really called it green heat in green and blue spaces, but GigAbs didn't really trip off the tongue, so it became GIGS. As Julia said, it built on a lot of learning from the Park Power project that we've been running for about the last 2.5 years. The project has looked at national scale opportunity analysis. That's what we've run. And we've had this list of partners down the left-hand side. We've actually had many more partners that have been involved in the project, but these were the ones who ultimately delivered the results to. And we've done some detailed summaries of all the results based on the 516 settlements or urban areas in Scotland, and also the 32 local authorities. We decided to release the findings report, the formal report, in May due to the PERDA period and the current situation in terms of reaching our political sort of stakeholders in this area. So the report will come out in May. But I would like to announce today that we will be making the data, the national data that we've made available to the project partners up to now, we're going to extend that to make it available for anyone in Scotland. So we've come to agreement with all our core partners. Although they've chipped in contribution, we feel that the benefits of making the data more widely available are greater than trying to retain the data just to those 14 organizations. So really pleased about that, and we hope that it will make a contribution to the wider heat strategy that our colleagues in Scottish Government are delivering at present. Next slide, please. Just to tell the story in pictures, this isn't necessarily strictly a green space, but it's certainly an urban open space on the banks of the Clyde, the John Brown shipyard that was and is now regenerated by what's called the Queen's Quay project, and part of that is a large water source heat pump that's sitting in the foreground now. This is an older slide. is in that area of vacant and derelict land. So this is regeneration in practice with water source heat in the heart of the Clyde Valley, using the immense resource of the catchment area, really, of the River Clyde, with looking towards Greenock in the distance. So yes, next slide, please, Lynn. And then another example, this one from our colleagues at Kenza, with in Sunderland, looking at a tower block, looking down from the tower block, utilizing the green space around the tower block, again for putting in low carbon heat in through vertical boreholes in the green space around the outside, and actually sort of virtually impinging on the children's play area there. So again, multi-use multi-use purpose of space. Yeah, next one, please. I'm going to pass you over to now to Ruth to take you through the next couple on policy.
Thanks, John. So in GIGS, we're all about finding these opportunities for connecting the potential offered by green and blue space to actual projects. And so these next slides are just going to give you a bit of context about the speed of policy development that we're working in at the moment, and so just the scale of the opportunity for developing renewable heat projects is growing. So if we look back at the last 5 years or 4 years, 2017, that back in December 2017, the Scottish Government set a target for the Scottish energy system to have 50% of energy for Scotland's heat, transport and electricity consumption to be supplied by renewable sources. And from there, the Energy Efficient Scotland Transition Programme has set out the process for starting to explore local heat energy efficiency strategies, which are a really critical part of helping to deliver renewable heat, and allocated funding for fuel poverty programs, and also about looking at energy efficiency and how, and particularly in areas that maybe haven't been historically focused on in energy efficiency, like the able to pay areas in the domestic and smaller scale non-domestic sectors. And then, of course, there was the declaration of a climate emergency in 2019 and the corresponding update to the Climate Change Scotland Act, with the net zero emissions target set for 2045 with interim targets for 2030 and 2040. So a really solid grounding for a regulatory basis for driving this decarbonisation of heat. And then we get into more specific project related legislation. So the Heat Network Scotland bill was finally passed just earlier this year, setting out that basis for supporting a much faster upscaling of heat networks in Scotland. Talk a little bit more in detail about that on the next slide. And then we've had an updated climate change plan, connecting to the pandemic that we're obviously still in the middle of, but connecting the climate change plan to a green recovery and the commitment to increase the number of green jobs and training and reskilling, and obviously renewable heat being a very local project focused activity has a huge potential to support that agenda. And then most recently, the heated buildings strategy draft that is currently out for consultation. So there with the Scottish Government setting out the delivery strategy for this climate change plan update. Local development plans are going to be formally required to take account of local heat and energy efficiency strategies and the heat network zones set within those. There's a commitment to bring forward new build heat standards, setting zero emissions heat in new buildings by 2024, and also new regulations to be developed requiring zero emissions heat in existing public sector buildings. So huge amounts of momentum are being generated by these regulatory changes, and we hope that the data that were produced through gigs are going to be able to support kind of some of the projects that can result from this. So next slide, please, Lynn. So just a look at what the Heat Network Scotland bill has set out. It makes specific heat network supply targets. So it says that a combined supply of thermal energy from heat networks should reach 2.6 terawatt hours of output by 2027, and that must include domestic connections equivalent to 120,000 homes. So to give you a sense of how much upscaling that means. We're currently approximately 30,000 homes connected to district heating in 2018, and 1.18 terawatt hours of heating cooling demand supplied. So significant increase, and that they sets out that it will be 6 terawatt hours of output by 2030, with 650,000 homes by 2030, with further targets to come. Next slide, please, Lynn. And then another really important piece of the jigsaw puzzle for enabling these projects to come forward is our local heat and energy efficiency strategies. And they're intended to set the strategic framework for reducing energy demand and decarbonising heat supply to buildings. They'll obviously be set at this local level, and they'll help tailor solutions to the local area, the local geographies, and they'll identify zones suitable for development of heat networks. So there's been pilots of local heat and energy efficiency strategies with all 32 local authorities in Scotland since 2018, and there's a methodology that is being developed to set a consistent approach to developing these strategies that is intended to come forward to consultation this year. And that I think in support of this strategy, that the local strategies will form the basis for further policy support to be targeted at the most appropriate areas. So the funding landscape will be developing around this, and that's really where gigs comes in. We have been looking at using the data available at the kind of Scotland level to tailor it and analyse local areas and think, okay, where are there opportunities for projects to be potentially developed, and where should further investigation be prioritised so that projects are ready to come forward when funding opportunities come forward, and when the regulatory landscape is particularly supportive of bringing them to delivery stages. Next slide, please, Lynn. So a little bit about what we did in gigs to do with local opportunity analysis. So we were aiming to identify specific renewable heat opportunities linked to green and blue spaces, and we used national level data but created an analysis that was relevant to at the local level, and we produced reports for the 14 local partners. And what we did was highlight in these reports the top 20 what we termed short-term opportunities and the top 20 longer-term opportunities for green spaces. And then also we've looked at the scale of the opportunity offered by river source heat, and we've looked at that as a settlement scale. Next slide, please, Lynn. So how do we do this? Well, we took these national data sets to enable a consistent approach across the country, which is why we're able to offer this data now for everyone to access. And then we have done specific analyses to look at the green spaces and the blue spaces. So when it came to green spaces, we filtered the green spatial data across the country to only consider what we've determined to be suitable sites. So we've got rid of things like steep slopes or particularly small pieces of green space, and just looked at the kind of larger scale, more suitable spaces. And then we've estimated the heat generation potential from those green spaces, thinking about using vertical closed loop borehole ground source heat pumps, we just assume that 20% of each green space was usable for heat, and make a calculation of what that green space potential heat generation potential is. Then we've looked at the heat demand in the surrounding area of the green space, and that's what John was referring to, that heat is spatial, and it's critical that where the renewable heat generation is created, that can be linked and supplied to a demand. And we've done that considering linear heat density as an indicator of the potential for a heat network, where the heat network would be able to take the renewable heat from a green space and supply it to a local building. And we consider public buildings as potential key anchor loads, slightly easier to understand where the heat demand currently sits, and to get that public support to enable the heat network's viability by connecting those key anchor loads. And we've used criteria to then prioritise opportunities based on the scale of the heat generation potential, the scale of the heat demand, and the attractiveness of the linear heat density. So it's really our ranking of opportunities at the local level are really indicating where there's a potential that should then be looked at in more detail with maybe a feasibility study. Then on the blue space side, we've looked at what the heat generation potential is using open loop water source heat pumps in rivers flowing through a settlement. So where there's demand within that settlement, we try to estimate what that water source heat pump potential would be. We're using river flow data from SEPA, so that only covers non-tidal rivers. So our estimate is probably an underestimate because we're only looking at the non-tidal rivers across Scotland, but still really just demonstrating the scale of the potential there for generating renewable heat at that local level. Next slide, I think, is passing back to John to take us through to the next national finding.
Okay, everybody. So let's talk to you about our national findings. So this is Stockton Park, and putting in their horizontal ground loop system underneath a football pitch. So in Edinburgh. So okay, next slide, please, Lynn. Thank you. So we produced an infographic here, which we'll make available to try and explain and communicate the significance of the amount of heat that we've found from both urban blue space and green space. So currently we have probably it's around 7% of heat demand from renewable sources. That's equivalent to the graphic on the front page that I showed you. So it's probably nearer about 9% of urban heat demand from renewable sources, I would have thought, to compare with the other figures. So urban green space, if you tot up all the figures, could supply an equivalent of 43% of Scotland's urban heat demand. This is urban heat demand, so this is heat demand from the settlements only. So 516 of those. If you add that to the blue space is even more significant. And again, we're just talking urban rivers here, non-tidal rivers. So this is probably an underestimate. It could contribute to equivalent of 50% of Scotland's urban heat demand just from rivers. So together, you add those up, we're talking 93%. Now, equivalent of figure of urban Scotland's urban heat demand. This is really, really significant. I hope that this is really significant for those who are maybe have a closer handle on policy decision making, because it demonstrates that there is this huge and potentially rather untapped low carbon heat supply within our relative arm's length within our urban centres, that currently we're really just scratching the surface. We've, you know, the Queen's Quay project in terms of its status is really one of the key leaders, and as is Caird Park in Dundee, for demonstrating this capacity. But there is so much more, and it really is significant. So I just want to break each of these down a little bit. We'll just talk about each of these areas briefly. Again, these national findings will come out in more detail in our report. So next slide, please, Lynn. Thank you. So let's just look at ground source heat. We have estimated 22.3 terawatt hours a year. That is equivalent to 43%. And just to put it in context in terms of the number of settlements, that's 227 of the 516 settlements in Scotland have sufficient suitable green space to supply at least 70% of their total heat demand from ground source heat. And it's particularly suited. We've done evidence here. I've got the figures, but I haven't put them on the slide. That it's particularly suited to towns that are in more remote locations, particularly smaller towns, those that are likely to have less options in terms of their low carbon heat supply. And again, particularly in off-grid towns, if you look at the comparison of off gas mains grid and on gas mains grid, it's very noticeable how much the off gas grid towns have in terms of their capacity to supply ground source heat. Largely because of the proportional difference in the amount of green space that they have available within their boundaries. So really interesting and hopefully valuable contribution to looking at some of the challenging areas and settlements and towns that we have to consider how we're going to decarbonize. Yes, next slide, please, Lynn. Let's talk about water. So even more, this is the Queen's Quay now, a sort of more up-to-date slide of the same one that I showed you before. And 25.6 terawatt hours in this case, so 50%, even more. 55% or 282 of Scotland's settlements can we have a flick-flack slide. Sorry, Lynn. Thank you. Again, major underestimate. And so we've got 282 can supply at least 70% of their total heat demand from sorry, that says ground source. It should say water source heat. And we haven't included any aspect of marine source heat. So settlements like Dundee, for example, are not considered. We have looked perhaps at the potential of using marine source heat for the 62% of Scotland's population in coastal settlements. So we have done some basic proximity assessment for settlements that are near lochs and other static water bodies, and also that are on the coast. But we haven't included those in our figures. So this is just non-tidal potential. So really, really significant. And as Ruth said, it's probably an underestimate. Okay, next one, please. Again, we've got some data on suitability of heat networks in our settlements. So we've calculated 167 settlements, or 32%, with a very large percentage, the vast majority of percentage of total settlement heat demand across Scotland, we would consider as being highly suitable for district heat networks. And a third of those have high potential for water source heat from local rivers as well. So please, when we do, obviously we're going to make this slide deck available, but we'll also make the report obviously available in May with more detail on all of these areas. So we'll refer you back to that. So this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I'm afraid, but do please reference the report. Okay, next one, please, Lynn. We've also created sort of ranked league tables of a whole range of different indicators. So this is just an example of a league table we've created at the settlement scale, looking at settlements that are off the mains gas grid. And we've got all sorts of other tables in our report as well, looking at tenure and energy efficiency of settlements, all that other relevant heat-related data. So this is just one showing, for example, how Fort William really is top of the pile in terms of the number of off-gas grid households of any settlement in Scotland. Okay, next one, please, Lynn. And there's another league table here. This one is for local authorities. So it's a breakdown of local authority and looking at all sorts of indicators for local authorities in terms of their aggregated potential for water source heat. And again, you would get these as Excel files, so you can rank the indicators any way you want to reorder these in any form. So we're making all of these tables available to you to manipulate as you like. Yeah, next one, please, Lynn. We've got some dashboards on the GIGS website, the GIGS webpage that are now available. This is a screenshot of one of them showing the site around Stirling and looking at heat demand, which is the sort of orangey circles, which are linear heat density zones of high heat demand. You can see Stirling University and Bridge of Allen there really standing out and mapping public buildings as well on there around the meanders of the Forth. So again, really useful data, hopefully for visualizing, easy tools, doesn't require GIS experience, so anyone can go in and have a look at that sort of data without any necessarily any GIS skills or data skills to explore it. And yeah, next slide. You can also use these dashboards. I created the profile on the right-hand side, a sort of one-page profile in about a minute, using the dashboard to just copy and paste the information off the dashboard and the map and put it in the top and link it to all sorts of relevant low-carbon heat data that you'll see on the left-hand side. To summarize a particular settlement, and you can do this type of profile for any of the 516 settlements in Scotland to create a sort of low carbon heat profile of the settlement and show the green space and blue space that is in the proximity of that settlement. So hopefully that's another way of using the dashboards for generating sort of more textual based reports. Okay, and next one. And you can do analysis. Here we've done a bit of analysis for Perth and Kinross based on the data that we've provided. So looking at the total number of settlements, their complete total heat demand, whether that comes from settlements or from rural, where they rank in terms of the table of settlements for Perth in this case. We've reclassified the data here on a map to present it more as a raster map to look at the green spaces that are particularly high heat capacity, so they stand out a bit more, and done some analysis in terms of the number of settlements that are suited in their patch for heat networks and river and ground source heat. So again, you can do this for your patch as well, or your town or city. Okay, next one, please. And this is another example of this is a small town called Lunkerty, just north of Perth, where we've done some analysis and, in fact, even used some additional software to create a heat network pipeline route around the town to distribute heat to all the buildings in the town. So you can start looking at all sorts of patterns, which I've explained on the left there. So do come back to that if you want the detail. Okay, next one. So just going to end here. Yep, there's a map of Perth, again, looking at the predominant green spaces. Next one. And again, if you have all the data, so you can do this yourselves, looking more regional scale at the Clyde Valley and looking at the relationship between water source heat and heat demand and how closely linked they are. So again, very useful on a regional scale. Okay, next one. So just to finish with, these are the key messages that we would like to give you to take away from today's findings, national findings. The first and most important is that these are water and ground source heat are really key potential low carbon heat sources that should be included in any sort of master planning exercise that you're doing. There really is major potential there that we've identified, much more so than previous studies have picked up. But that's not surprising given the level of detail of the data that we've analysed. We've picked up lots of areas where there are some data gaps and that deserving of additional analysis and additional investigation. And again, we highlight those in our findings report. We're going to make this data, as I said at the beginning, nationally available, and we hope that it will be of use to the LHES process. And we're going to run a workshop for core partners in the project in May and June to explore how to use the data and the findings from this report in more detail, just to help them kind of smooth the path to progress. And lastly, the findings will be out in May in a report. So let's have a vision. Here's Drammen. Here's a Drammen of around 60,000 people in Norway. This is an example that Dave Pearson, who's speaking later, often quotes. It's a water source heat solution that provides power not just to the buildings around the river, but to the whole town. And here are a list of other towns and cities in Glasgow with the highest potential for water source heat. Now, why can't we do this? Ayr is the same size as Drammen. Why can't we do a solution like this for Ayr? Why can't we do it, frankly, for Glasgow? The potential is out there. We just need to investigate and dig into it, and hopefully our findings will help us do that to a greater degree than we have done up to now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John and Ruth. Really exciting, interesting presentation there, and potentially exciting vision for the future. There was certainly some very mind-boggling figures there in that presentation, and I'm sure folk will be kind of struggling to be jotting things down. So to answer one of the first questions, yes, we will be sharing slide decks. We'll just check with partners whether anything is commercial in confidence before we share, but that is the intention, and we'll be publishing the results in full. We've just got time for a couple of very quick questions that have come through. So I'm going to ask the first couple of questions to John and Ruth, and I'll let you decide which one wants to answer them. The first one is around those estimates for ground source heat and water source heat in terms of meeting. I think ground source heat was 43% of the current levels of demand. Was that before taking into account any energy efficiency measures? And that's a question that came from Brian Davidson. So if you think about that one, and I'll couple that one with another one following up around the blue source and water source heat in relation to canals. We've obviously got a lot of canals across the central belt of Scotland. Are they suitable as a heat source, or do we have problems with lack of flow? So John, do you want to pick up in terms of the energy efficiency, and Ruth pick up the canal question?
Sure. Ruth might also want to comment on the energy efficiency. The findings that we've looked at are based on the heat demand data that the heat map, Scottish Government's heat map, have released. So they are a current status quo based on the figures that the buildings are currently the current sort of status of the buildings in terms of their heat demand. So in effect, if we invest significantly more, and I think that it would be the right way to go in reducing our energy demand through energy efficiency measures, we should be able to bring down that demand. But we keep saying this, that we're going to do this, and then every year demand creeps up. And so I'm not 100% confident that even if we undertake these energy efficiency measures, there's actually underlying research suggesting that people, the amount of energy heat demand that people take is not as significant as the amount of energy efficiency that we can apply to any particular building. So there is that mismatch, but I do agree that hopefully those energy demand figures will come down. We've also capped the heat supply. So if anyone's thinking that actually we've got small towns in the north of Scotland who are generating huge amounts of heat because of their location being on a very large river or being surrounded by green space, that is not the case. We have done a fair amount of work to try and make sure that we're not overestimating the capacity figures that we're quoting as a result of being skewed by potentially small towns having much higher heat generation capacity than you might expect. So we have addressed the sort of spatial demand issue. Sorry, Ruth.
Quick response, Ruth, if you can, on canals.
Yeah, really quick on canals. Just, I mean, I'm not a massive technical expert on this, but just the volume of heat from water sources is a product of the temperature and the flow. So obviously canals have less flow than rivers, and therefore there's less potential there. So yes, that's correct. There's slightly less potential from canals than from rivers.
Okay, thanks for that. It's always the way you suddenly get a whole flurry of questions coming in. So there's some we're not going to have time to answer now, but we will come back to folk offline. So we've got some comments around sort of ecosystems and nature, and whether we have taken the cost of installing the energy installation in terms of some of those carbon offsetting costs that we've covered. The usual comments often coming in around costs in relation to the gas counterfactual in terms of making these stack up as viable schemes, and whether we've done any assessment in terms of habitat and nature impacts and restoration of time periods. So there's quite a big topic to get into that we probably haven't got time to explore now, but we will come back to those following the event. And there's a question in here as well from Susan Cargill that I'm going to carry over to the next session, because her question was around integrating LHEs with the local planning system. And that links neatly into the next session, which is on strategic master planning. And we'll hear from colleagues in Perth and Kinross and Fife around their LHEs process. So I'm going to draw this first session to a close. Sorry for those who have asked questions that we haven't got to at this point, but we will now just take a very quick 4-minute break, give you a chance to stretch and refresh your cuppa, and please join us back here at 10:50, and we will be starting on the strategic energy master planning session. So see you in a few minutes. Thank you.